The customs officer did not laugh at my face. He laughed at my badge. I had just placed my travel card on the scanner at Vailthar Station's arrival gate when he looked down at the little bronze disc clipped to my jacket. His eyes went wide for a half-second, then his mouth curled into a grin that he did not bother hiding. He said something in the local dialect to the officer beside him. The second officer looked at my badge and made a sound somewhere between a cough and a chuckle. Neither of them looked at me the way you look at a person. They looked at me the way you look at something that showed up where it does not belong. I let them finish. Then I said, in standard galactic common, that I would like my transit stamp before the next shift rotation, if they did not mind. The first officer straightened up and processed my card without another word. Vailthar Station is the kind of place that hits you all at once. It is not beautiful, not in any clean way. It is enormous and loud and layered with smells that have no Earth equivalent. The main atrium alone is 400 meters from floor to ceiling, and every level of it is moving. Freight haulers rolling on magnetic rails above your head. Vendors calling in 12 languages from stalls that cling to the curved inner walls. Species you have never seen, and species you have read about, and a few that the syndicate databases still do not have complete files on. The air smells like ozone and something metallic, and something else that is warm and organic in a way that I always associate, for reasons I cannot fully explain, with the smell of rain on hot stone. I stood at the base of the atrium for a moment and breathed it in. My name is Cale Dren. I am 31 years old. I was born in a small town in northern Wales, grew up chasing things through wet forests, and spent the better part of my adult life in places where most people would not last a week. I am not tall. I am not especially large. I have no bioluminescence, which is apparently the first thing most species look for when assessing a person's threat level. I have no psionic signature, no venom, no natural armor, no echolocation, and no biological heat resistance above what any ordinary human body provides. The Syndicate's intake scanner at Earth's orbital gateway had categorized me, very clinically, as non-combat species, baseline biology, recommend support or logistics track. I had thanked the technician who printed that assessment and tucked it into my jacket pocket. The Hunters Syndicate is the oldest active contractor organization in known space. It handles everything from planetary pest control to threat assessment on uncharted worlds to full-scale containment operations when something truly dangerous gets loose somewhere it should not be. Joining requires a species accreditation, a baseline physical and cognitive assessment, and placement into the ranking tier that best reflects your capability. The ranking system goes Apprentice, Journeyman, Specialist, Elite, and Apex. Most species spend years, sometimes decades, climbing out of Apprentice. A good number never make it to Specialist. Elite hunters are respected everywhere in the galaxy. Apex hunters are something else entirely. There are fewer than 200 of them across 40 known species. They are the ones who take contracts that no one else will take. They are the ones other hunters watch from a distance with something that looks like reverence and probably is. I had been an apprentice for 3 weeks. The badge was a small bronze disc with a single horizontal line across the center. Clean, simple, and absolutely unmistakable to anyone who knew the Syndicate's rank markings, and everyone on Vailthar Station knew the Syndicate's rank markings. I had picked up my gear from the freight claim, shouldered my pack, and was walking toward the transit corridor when I first noticed the shift in the crowd. Not a dramatic shift, not the kind where people stop and stare, the quieter kind, where foot traffic rearranges itself slightly, where conversations dip by a degree or two, where eyes track something moving through a space that is not usually used for that kind of movement. I looked toward the source of it. She came through the main atrium entrance with 2 people flanking her, and the crowd opened up around her the way water parts around something large and solid. She was tall, taller than most of the species around her, with scales the color of deep water, where it is almost black but shimmers when the light hits it a certain way. Her rank badge was not bronze. It was a deep silver blue, with a 4-point mark that I recognized as the elite symbol, and below it, a secondary crest that I had read about but not seen in person, a royal indicator for the Vailthari sovereign clade. The 2 flanking her were elites as well. They moved the way people move when they are always watching everything. Someone near me said her name in a whisper, Saraveth. Just the one name. The way you say a name when you assume everyone already knows the rest. I had read about her in the Syndicate's public records. Princess of the Veilthari Clade, which made her one of about 12 people in the galaxy with actual inherited governmental authority, and a Class 4 elite hunter in her own right, which meant she had earned her rank on top of being born into power. The combination was rare enough that the Syndicate used her as an example in their recruitment materials, though I doubted she knew that. She was moving toward the registration desk, which was where I was also heading. I got there first by about 15 seconds. The registration officer was in the middle of logging my transit details when the small entourage arrived at the adjacent window. I was not looking at them. I was watching the officer enter my assignment details and double-checking that my equipment inventory had transferred correctly from the freight manifest. It was detailed work, the kind that requires actual attention, and I was giving it that attention. Then the process stopped. Not at my window. At the window next to mine, where someone had just noticed something. I heard the sound before I understood it. It was a pause in a conversation, the specific kind of pause that means someone has seen something they find entertaining in a way they do not mind showing. And then, in a voice that carried clearly through the ambient noise of the atrium, I heard Saraveth say something in Veilthari that I did not speak fluently, but understood well enough. The translation was approximately, I was not aware the Syndicate had opened its apprentice program to livestock. The laughter that followed was not loud. It was the contained, polite kind that happens when people find something genuinely funny, but are in a setting that calls for a measure of control. I heard it from her escorts. I heard it from the registration officer at her window. I heard it from 2 or 3 people close enough to have caught the remark. I did not flinch. I did not look up immediately. I finished reading the line on my equipment manifest that I had been reading, confirmed it was correct, and then I looked up. She was looking at me. She had expected, I think, one of several reactions. Embarrassment was probably at the top of the list. Maybe confusion. Maybe the kind of stiff, overcompensating dignity that people sometimes perform when they are trying to pretend they are not hurt. She did not look like she had expected what she got, which was a calm, direct look and a small, entirely genuine smile. I said, in common galactic, "Nice to meet you too." There was a brief silence, not a comfortable one. Then Saraveth turned back to her registration window, and something in the set of her shoulders had changed by a fraction. Not much, just enough to notice if you were paying attention. I turned back to mine. The registration officer finished logging my details and slid my assignment confirmation across the desk. I picked it up, checked it once, folded it, and put it in my jacket pocket next to the Syndicate's assessment that had called me non-combat species, baseline biology. I picked up my pack and started walking toward the transit corridor. I had a contract to prepare for, a Class Omega creature on a death world, with a jungle biome and a surface threat rating that the Syndicate's own records described as extreme. The dossier was waiting in my assignment queue. I had already read it twice on the transit ship coming in, but I wanted to read it again on the ground, with the gravity and the air and the smell of the place around me, because things read differently when you are already inside the environment that produced them. I had not mentioned the contract to anyone yet. I had filed for it independently, 2 hours after the public posting had gone live. The Syndicate system had flagged my application automatically, because apprentices do not normally file for Class Omega contracts. There had been a brief message from an administrative officer, asking me to confirm that I understood the risk classification. I had confirmed. The application had been processed. I walked through the transit corridor and thought about the dossier. I thought about the specific behavioral markers described in the section labeled Known Attack Patterns. I thought about 3 things the dossier had gotten wrong, which I had noticed on my second reading. I thought about a river valley in the eastern Congo, where I had spent 6 weeks alone, tracking a family of large predators that the local wildlife authority had been trying to study for 3 years without success. I thought about the morning I had found the place where they slept, not by following them, because they were too good at losing a trail, but by reading everything around the trail instead. The vegetation patterns, the sound distribution, the way a certain species of bird moved in the canopy above a particular kind of ground-level disturbance. I thought about what it felt like to sit very still in the dark and wait for something much larger than you to come home. Vailthar Station's transit corridor was bright and loud and full of people going places. I walked through it with my pack on my back and my assignment confirmation in my pocket, and I thought about what I would need for the first day on the ground. But the princess had laughed at my badge. She had never thought to ask why a human would show up to the most dangerous job in the galaxy and look so completely genuinely calm. The delay notice came through on the station's public board at the 3rd hour mark, and it said what delay notices always say, which is that the situation was being managed, and that departure times would be updated as information became available. The warp gate on the 3rd transit ring had developed a calibration fault. That was the official language. What it actually meant was that nothing was going in or out of Gate 3 until the engineering crew finished their work, and the engineering crew's estimate was 36 hours, which was an estimate the way weather forecasts are estimates, meaning it could be accurate or it could be very wrong in either direction. I was assigned to Transit Bay 7 on Ring 3, and so was Saraveth's team. I found this out when I arrived at the bay with my pack, and my dossier pulled up on my reader, and walked through the sealed door into a large, climate-controlled holding area with rows of seating units, a cargo staging area along the far wall, and, sitting in the corner section nearest the observation window, with her 2 elite escorts arranged on either side of her, like furniture that had learned to breathe, Princess Saraveth of the Vailthari Sovereign Clade. She looked at me when I came through the door. Her expression did not change, but something in it registered my presence, the way a scanner registers a reading it was not expecting. I found a seat on the opposite side of the bay, set my pack down, pulled out my reader, and went back to the dossier. For a while, that was all there was. The hum of the station's circulation system, the distant sound of machinery working on the gate, the low, occasional exchange between Saraveth and her escorts in Vailthari, which I understood in fragments. They were discussing logistics, mission parameters, equipment checks, professional conversation between professionals who trusted each other and had worked together for a long time. I read the dossier section on the Velkarath's territorial range for the 3rd time and thought about the disparity between the mapped boundaries and the behavioral profile. If the behavioral profile was accurate, the territorial range was at least 30% larger than mapped, and if the territorial range was larger than mapped, then the Denning sites listed in the appendix were probably wrong too, which meant the approach vectors recommended in Section 4 were probably wrong, which meant that anyone following the Syndicate's standard approach plan for this particular contract was going to walk into exactly the kind of situation the contract was supposed to prevent. I made a note in the margin. At some point, one of the escorts, the shorter of the two, with an angular build and a rank badge that showed specialist rather than elite, got up and moved to the station's supply kiosk near the door. He came back with 2 sealed containers of something liquid that steamed faintly. He gave one to Saraveth and kept one for himself. The second escort did not receive one. I noted that the second escort did not react to this, which told me something about the internal structure of their group that was probably not relevant, but was interesting anyway. I reached into my pack and took out the small sealed case that I carry in the outer pocket. Inside it was a compact field burner, a metal cup, a sealed pouch of ground coffee, and a small folded filter. I set up the burner on the flat armrest beside me, which had clearly never been used for that purpose, boiled water from my canteen, and made coffee. The smell hit the bay within about 40 seconds. I know what coffee smells like to other humans. It smells like morning, or like comfort, or like a familiar ritual depending on your relationship with it. I have been told, by several non-human species, that it smells like something else entirely, warm and complex and slightly wrong in a way that is hard to define. One of my colleagues at the Wildlife Research Station in Kenya had once described the reaction of a visiting delegation from the Thrani Collective to a pot of fresh coffee as the look of people who have just been told something true that they were not ready to hear. Every head in the transit bay turned. Saraveth's 2 escorts both looked up simultaneously. The specialist stood half out of his seat before he appeared to decide that standing was not appropriate and sat back down. Saraveth herself did not move, but her eyes came off whatever she had been reading and found the source of the smell, which was me, sitting calmly with a metal cup in my hands. I took a sip. After a moment, Saraveth said, "In common galactic, what is that?" "Coffee," I said. It is a drink made from roasted plant seeds, very common on Earth. Another pause. Then, it smells unusual. Most non-human species find it unusual, I said. Some find it unpleasant. Some find it interesting. Would you like to try it? The offer sat in the air for a moment. I expected her to decline. Instead, after a beat that lasted just long enough for me to understand that she was making a decision, rather than acting automatically, she said, I will try a small amount. I made her a cup. The burner, the filter, the process. I did not rush it, and I did not perform it. I just made coffee. When I handed it to her, she held it for a moment before she drank. She sipped it carefully, the way you taste something when you are genuinely trying to assess it, rather than just trying to appear polite. She was quiet for a moment after. It is strong, she said. Yes, I said. You get used to it. The specialist escort was watching this exchange with an expression I could not read. The elite escort, the one who had not received a drink from the kiosk, was watching me. Saraveth sat back slightly and said, as though it were a casual question and not a test, tell me the year that the Dralkai homeworld was formally admitted to the Syndicate Collective. 2041, in the Galactic Standard Count, I said, which was 14 years after the border conflicts with the Yeth Federation ended. The admission was conditional on a disarmament clause that was removed 8 years later, after the third revision of the collective charter. She looked at me steadily. Most people do not know the charter revision history. I spent 3 years reading before I applied, I said. I read what interested me.
And what interested you?
Everything, I said honestly. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite dismissal. It was something in between. Then she asked a harder question. She gave me a specific date in the early galactic record and asked me what political event had occurred in the sector adjacent to Vailthar space. It was the kind of question that appears in advanced syndicate officer examinations. I had read about it in a history volume that most people do not know exists, because it was published by a research collective that had since been dissolved. I answered it correctly. The look on her face this time was different. It was not the look of someone who is impressed in the way they are used to being impressed. It was the look of someone who is recalculating something. How long have you been with the syndicate? She said. 3 weeks, I said. She looked at my badge. She had looked at it before, in the atrium, and found it funny. She looked at it now, and found it something else. Confusing, maybe, or interesting, in the way a problem is interesting, when you cannot immediately see the solution. Why did you not test for a higher rank? She said. I wrapped both hands around my cup. The syndicate does not have a rank category for what I used to do, I said, so I started at the bottom. It will not take long. She was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into her jacket and pulled out a flat display card, which she expanded and slid across the space between us. This is my current contract, she said. Since we appear to be sharing a transit bay for 36 hours, you may as well know what we are walking into. I picked up the card. It was the Velkarath contract, the same one that was sitting in my assignment queue, the same one I had read 3 times. I read it again, from the beginning, as though I were seeing it for the first time. I took my time. I let her watch me read. When I got to the section on behavioral patterns, I stopped. I read it twice. Then I set the card down and picked up my cup. The approach vectors in section 4 are wrong, I said. She waited. The behavioral profile says the Velkarath resets its territory markers every 3 days, I said. But the territorial range in the map is too small for a creature with those markers. If you use those approach vectors, you will be moving through its active territory, not around it. The creature will have already scented your approach before you are within detection range of it. She looked at the card, then she looked at me. The Syndicate's best field assessors produced that map. I know, I said, and the map is incomplete. The behavioral data does not match the spatial data. One of them is wrong. Which one? She said. The map, I said. The behavior is consistent. The territory it describes is not. She was very still for a moment. Her elite escort had stopped pretending not to listen. The specialist was leaning slightly forward. How do you know this? Saraveth said. The Velkarath's territory markers are described as chemically complex and long range, I said. On Earth, we have a predator called a leopard. It marks territory the same way. The range of its marks is always larger than what casual observation suggests, because the chemicals persist in the environment and continue to function after the animal has moved on. The animal's actual territory follows the active boundary, not the chemical residue. The syndicate map is reading residue. The Vel'Karath is nothing like a leopard, she said. No, I agreed. But the mechanism is the same. Biology finds the same solutions in different shapes. She picked up the display card and looked at it for a long time. Then she set it down and looked at me with an expression that I would describe, if I had to, as the particular kind of focus that appears when someone stops categorizing you and starts actually seeing you. She did not apologize for the atrium. We both knew she was not going to do that yet. But she did not look at my badge the way she had looked at it before. There is something else, I said. The behavioral profile says the Vel'Karath is a solitary predator. It is, she said. Every recorded encounter confirms it. Every recorded encounter has had survivors, I said, which means every recorded encounter has been one where the Vel'Karath chose not to press its advantage. A solitary ambush predator that consistently lets prey escape is either injured or it is not actually solitary. It is managing the interaction, keeping the prey presence in its territory at a level it can control. She looked at me for a long time. You are saying there is more than one, she said. I am saying it is possible, I said. I would want to see the actual terrain before I committed to that. But yes, I think it is possible. Saraveth looked at her elite escort. The escort looked back at her. Something passed between them that I could not read. The compressed communication of two people who have worked together long enough to say complex things without words. Then Saraveth looked back at me and said, in a voice that was several degrees quieter and more careful than any voice she had used in the atrium, "You filed for this contract." "Yes," I said. "Independently." "Yes." "As an apprentice." "Yes." She was quiet. Then she said, "The contract closes in 4 days. We depart when the gate clears." "I know," I said. "I will be on the same ship." She looked at me once more. Then she turned and said something to her escort in Velthari that I caught about 60% of. The fragment I caught clearly was the part that meant, find out everything about him that the syndicate has on record. I finished my coffee. It had gone slightly cool, but it was still good. I thought about the 3 behavioral anomalies in the dossier. I thought about the territorial range and the approach vectors, and the thing the profile had said about the Vel'Karath always releasing its prey. And I thought about a morning in a steep valley in the eastern arc of the Himalayas, where I had watched a pair of large predators work in coordinated silence for 40 minutes, before I realized I was watching a hunt, and not 2 animals that happened to be in the same place. I thought about how the second animal had been invisible the entire time. I put away my burner, folded my cup, and opened the dossier again from the beginning. I had 34 hours before the gate was fixed. That was enough time to read it several more times. Planet Drathvel came into view through the transport's forward observation port at exactly the hour the navigation system had predicted, and the first thing I noticed was that it was green. Not the clean, organized green of farmland or managed forest, the green of a place that has been growing and feeding on itself, and growing again for so long, that it has become something almost aggressive in its completeness. The kind of green that looks like it would close over a clearing the moment you stopped cutting, like it was always already planning to reclaim whatever you had taken from it. I had seen that green before. It looked like home. The descent was rough. Draft-Vel's upper atmosphere had significant particulate density, which the pilot described in the mission briefing as a minor turbulence factor, and which I would describe as 40 minutes of being shaken in a container, while the container fell through a sky that did not want to let you in. Saraveth's 2 escorts, whose names I had learned during the transit hold, Thren, the elite, and Parvaz, the specialist, were both strapped in and still. Saraveth herself sat across from me in the hold and read from her display without appearing to notice the turbulence, which I respected. I watched the ground coming up through the small port window beside me and thought about what I already knew and what I still needed to learn. The briefing packet had confirmed what I had suspected about the territorial range. The field team that had produced the original map had been a fast survey crew. 3 days on the ground with aerial sensors and no surface tracking. Aerial sensors are good at reading what is there. They are less good at reading what was there and has since moved. The chemical markers left by the Velkarath were not dense enough to register strongly from altitude, which was why the mapped range was so much smaller than the actual behavioral data suggested. I had written a revised approach estimate in my notes. It put the active territorial boundary roughly 4 kilometers further north and west than the syndicate map showed, which meant the 2 primary approach vectors in the mission plan led straight through the creature's hunting ground. We touched down in a cleared area that the survey team had flagged as stable, and the landing gear sank 2 centimeters into the ground before the soil resistance held. The air that came through the hold's ventilation sample was thick and warm, and layered in a way that made my brain immediately begin cataloging. Ammonia, faint and distant, something organic that was fresh and recent, something else that was older, heavier, like deep water and moss and the inside of a long-sealed space. The Velkarath's markers, possibly. Distant, but present. The hold opened and we stepped out into the light. Drathvel's sky was a pale brownish gray from the particulates, and it filtered the sun into something wide and sourceless, shadowless in a way that took a moment to adjust to. The jungle began at the edge of the clearing, and it was immediate. No gentle tree line, no gradual increase, just a wall of vegetation so dense it looked solid from 10 meters away. Thren was already running a suit sensor sweep. His equipment was elite-level syndicate issue, which meant it was very good, and he was very good at using it. Parvas had her weapon slung, and was doing a visual perimeter check, the way someone does when they have been trained to treat arriving in a new place as an immediate security situation. Saraveth stood at the edge of the cleared area and looked at the jungle. She had changed into field gear during the descent, still clearly high-grade, but less formal than what she had worn on the station. She looked like someone who spent real time in places like this, which she did. I walked past all of them and crouched at the edge of the clearing where the cleared ground met the first roots of the jungle. I was not looking at the jungle. I was looking at the ground directly in front of me. The soil at the edge had been compressed recently, not by the landing. The ship had come down in the center of the clear area.
By something moving along the edge.
The compression pattern was wide and showed multiple overlapping tracks, but they were distributed in a way that did not suggest a single heavy animal. They suggested a distribution of weight across multiple contact points, moving in roughly the same direction over a period of several hours. I put 2 fingers into the soil and pressed, then let go and watched how quickly it rebounded, fresh enough to be within 12 hours, possibly less. I stood up and looked at the tree line directly ahead of me, then at the tree line to the left, then to the right. The bark on a cluster of trees to the left was stripped at a height of roughly 2.5 meters. The stripping was clean and deliberate, not the tearing you get from weather damage or simple contact. It went in a vertical line, repeated on 3 adjacent trunks, evenly spaced. Territory markers. I walked over and looked more carefully. The surface of the stripped areas was slightly tacky. Recent, the height was consistent across all 3 trunks. Thren was beside me a moment later, his scanner up. "It's registering a moderate chemical signature," he said, "consistent with the Velkarath marker compounds." "How does it compare to the mapped territorial boundary?" I said. He checked the reading against his reference data. There was a brief pause. "We are inside the boundary," he said, "by approximately 3.5 kilometers. So the revised estimate was slightly conservative," I said. Thren lowered the scanner and looked at me. It was a careful look, the kind that comes from someone who has been doing a job for a long time and who has learned to recalibrate quickly when the situation asks for it. "You knew before we landed," he said. "I suspected," I said. "I did not know until now." I turned and walked back to where Saraveth and Parvas were standing. Saraveth had been watching me at the tree line. I knew that without having to check, I could feel the quality of attention. "We are already inside its range," I said. "The entire planned approach is inside its active territory. We need to reconsider the entry route." Parvas looked at Saraveth. Saraveth looked at the map on her display card, then at the tree line, then at me. "The syndicate plan has a margin for territorial variation," she said. "The margin assumes a range consistent with the map," I said. "The actual range is larger. If we follow the plan, We will be inside its hunting pattern for the full duration of the approach, rather than entering it at the final stage. That changes the exposure window significantly. Thren spoke before Saraveth could. The apprentice is right, he said quietly. The marker density here is high. This is core territory, not fringe. The word apprentice did not carry the edge it would have carried from Saraveth 2 days ago. From Thren, it was simply accurate, a rank designation. He was stating a fact, not making a point about it. Saraveth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Show me the alternative route." I pulled out my reader and opened the terrain file I had been building from the survey data and the behavioral profile. I had marked an alternative approach that moved north first and then curved west, staying in the lower density fringe areas as long as possible before committing to a direct approach on the denning zone. It added time, roughly 4 hours to the first day of movement, but it meant we would not be moving through the hunting ground from the moment we stepped into the trees. She studied it. Thren looked over her shoulder. Parvus moved to look from the other side. The northern route crosses a wet ground area, Saraveth said. The survey flagged it as difficult terrain. Yes, I said. But difficult terrain is also difficult for something that relies on ambush. It prefers firm ground with good cover. The wet area is open and flat. We will be visible, but so will anything moving toward us. Saraveth handed the reader back to me. We use your route, she said. We moved into the jungle 20 minutes later with Thren on point, Parvas at the rear, Saraveth in the center, and me just ahead of Saraveth, which put me in the second position, which was not standard for an apprentice, and nobody commented on it. The jungle absorbed us immediately. Not dramatically, not the way it looks in adventure stories, but practically. The sound of the clearing vanished within 30 meters, and was replaced by the layered sound of a very alive environment. Wind in the upper canopy, water somewhere ahead, the small, constant sounds of living things that are always present in a place like this, and that you stop hearing as individual sounds after a few minutes, and start hearing as a single, continuous texture. I was watching the canopy as much as the ground. The Velkarath's profile said it was a ground-level predator, and that was true in terms of where it attacked from. But large predators often move at multiple heights, and the things living in the canopy above you will tell you almost as much about what is on the ground as your own eyes. About 40 minutes in, a section of canopy to the left went very quiet, not gradually, in a short, sharp stop that lasted about 3 seconds before the ambient sound resumed. I put my hand out to my left without slowing my pace. The signal every hunter understands. Stop or slow. Saraveth felt it and slowed. I heard Thren's footsteps ahead also change rhythm, and understood that he had picked it up on his scanner. I looked at the section of canopy that had gone quiet. It was already back to normal ambient sound, but something had passed below it, or through it, and the animals there had chosen to go still rather than flee. Choosing to go still rather than flee usually means the thing that disturbed you is something you know is large enough to make fleeing pointless. I looked at the ground to the left. The vegetation at the mid-level was intact. No disturbance. The ground further left was in heavy shadow. I could not see it clearly. I looked at the ground directly ahead, and then to the right. The bark on a tree 20 meters ahead, and to the right, had a fresh scrape at ground level. Not a marker. A contact scrape, the kind left by something brushing past a trunk while moving. Moving from right to left, which put it somewhere to our left, in the shadow where I could not clearly see. I stopped walking. Thren stopped. Saraveth stopped. Parvus stopped. I stood completely still and listened. The ambient sound of the jungle was normal. The canopy to the left was normal again. Whatever had moved through had settled. I raised 3 fingers and pointed to the left without looking at Saraveth. Then I held up 1 finger. Then I moved 2 fingers to indicate the front left diagonal. Then I traced a slow arc with my hand, left to center right, indicating direction of movement. Thren, who had been watching my signals in his peripheral vision, moved smoothly to a braced position. Parvas behind us went to alert without making a sound. Saraveth, I realized as I glanced at her, had understood every signal I had made, and had already shifted her stance. We waited. 50 seconds of complete stillness. Then the jungle to our left erupted. It was fast, faster than the profile had suggested, faster than I had mentally prepared for even knowing what I knew. A shape that was all weight and forward momentum came out of the shadow from exactly the direction I had indicated, and it was aimed at Thren. Thren was not where he had been. He had shifted position during our wait, which was good instinct and good training, and the Vel'Karath strike caught his shoulder instead of his center mass, which is probably the reason Thren is still alive. The impact still knocked him sideways 4 meters, and his shoulder armor showed a deep gouge that had come within about 8 millimeters of the underlying structure. The Vel'Karath hit the ground past him and turned in a movement that should not have been possible for something that large, and was in the air again in an instant. And I was already not in the position I had been standing in. I had moved the moment the jungle erupted, not away, to the side and forward, angling behind the creature's line of movement, because the thing that large predators cannot do well on the first pass is reverse their committed direction. It had committed to Thren. Its reverse was going to take it away from Thren and toward the left. I was in the left, but I was also below its likely eye line and already moving in a direction that put a large trunk between me and its return path. It hit the ground, turned, and went left. I was behind the trunk. It went past me at a distance of roughly 4 meters, which is very close when the thing going past you is that large, and I had just enough time to observe very clearly 3 things. First, the Vel'Karath was larger than its profile dimensions, larger by at least 15% in linear measurement, which meant significantly more mass. Second, it had not come from the shadow at full speed. It had accelerated into the attack from a rest position, which meant it had been watching us for some time before it moved. It had chosen its moment. Third, and most important, when it went past me and continued into the jungle ahead of us, it did not slow down. It did not look back. It was not retreating. It was moving to a position. I came out from behind the trunk. "It is resetting," I said. "It did not finish its attack. It is repositioning." Thren was on his feet, checking his shoulder. The armor had held. He was operational. "1 animal," he said. "Scans confirm 1 contact." "The scans are right," I said. "There is only 1 animal here, but it does not attack once. It attacks, withdraws, repositions, and attacks again. It is using terrain as a second ambush. We are between it and where it is going." I looked at Saraveth. She was looking at me with the focused attention of someone who has just watched a plan work out in exactly the shape it was described to them. "The thing that let every previous team survive," I said, "is that it stops after the first pass, but it only stops because previous teams ran. It is designed to chase. We did not run. It does not know what to do with that yet, but it will figure it out on the next pass, and the next pass will be different." Parva said, from behind us, "How long do we have?" "Maybe 4 minutes," I said. "Less if the terrain between here and its target position is open." Saraveth looked at the jungle in the direction the Vel'Karath had gone. Then she looked at me. "What do we do?" she said. And something in the way she asked it had nothing in it of the person who had stood in the atrium of Vaelthar Station and said what she had said about livestock. It was just a question, a real one, from someone in a difficult situation who was asking the most qualified person available. I had already started moving. "We go toward it," I said. "Not away. Come with me." The second strike never came. Not because the Vel'Karath did not try. It tried. I heard it commit. Heard the weight of it shifting in the brush ahead of us on the new line I had taken us along, and I had stopped us in time, put a raised ridge of root mass between us and the attack angle, and the creature had pulled up short, rather than hit ground it could not see clearly. That told me something important. It was smart enough to abort. It's smart enough to not fully commit to a strike when it did not have full information about the landing zone. That level of intelligence in a predator meant its behavioral patterns had deeper layers than the profile suggested. We had spent the rest of the first day moving, stopping, reading, adjusting. I had changed our direction 4 times based on ambient signals that I could not have explained simply to someone who had not spent years learning to read them. The direction a particular moss grew told me about consistent water flow, which told me about the terrain's drainage, which told me about where the firm ground was, which told me about where the Vel'Karath preferred to ambush from. The distribution of a specific type of ground-level insect told me about where large animals had been walking regularly, because those insects feed on the disrupted soil. I built a picture, not all at once, but layer by layer. Thren had stopped checking his scanner against my assessments by midday. He still ran the scans. They were useful for confirming specifics, but he had started using them to support what I was reading from the environment, rather than treating them as the primary source. Parvaz was the most tactically focused of the three. She never said much, but she positioned herself based on what I said about likely threat angles, and she positioned herself correctly, which meant she was following it and trusting it. Saraveth stayed close and watched everything. We made camp at a site I chose based on 3 factors: a natural rock formation that closed off one approach entirely, a water source that was likely to be avoided by the Velkarath due to the scent profile of the local aquatic life, and a line of sight across the most likely remaining approach vector that was long enough to give us real reaction time. I lit a fire. This produced an interesting response. Thren and Parvaz both registered it with surprise. Saraveth registered it with something more complex. Fire is, as I had noted during the transit hold, considered a primitive technology by most syndicate species. Something from the early developmental period. Something you moved past. Humans had moved past it in the sense that we did not need it anymore. We had not moved past it in the sense that we no longer understood how to use it, or why it still worked. The local fauna has threat response patterning to smoke and heat, I said, setting the fire correctly to produce a light, directional smoke column. There are 3 species in this biome that the Velkarath avoids in close proximity. All 3 show the same response to fire, because they evolved in a region of this continent where volcanic activity occurs. The Velkarath has not evolved alongside volcanoes. It will not be certain what to make of this. It will stay further away tonight than it would otherwise. Parvaz said, "That is not in the mission profile." "No," I said. "It is in a botanical ecology survey of the continent published by a research collective that stopped operating 19 years ago. The survey is in the Syndicate Archive database, under Resource and Environmental Assessment, which most hunters do not read, because it is not specifically a mission document." A brief silence. Thren said, "You read the Resource and Environmental Assessment documents." "I read everything," I said. Saraveth sat across the fire from me and looked at the flames. She was not uncomfortable with the fire, I noticed. She watched it the way someone watches something they have not seen before but are not afraid of. She was the kind of person who categorized new things rather than reacted to them. That was a good quality. "The Velkarath tried to reset twice today," she said, "and both times you had already moved us." "Yes," I said. "You were reading it before your instruments," she said, "and this was directed at Thren, not me." "He was reading things the instruments do not measure," Thren said. "Ambient behavioral patterns, sound distribution, the way the vegetation moves differently when something large is using it as cover versus when the wind moves it." He paused. "I have been an elite hunter for 11 years. I have never seen someone read a field the way he does." Saraveth looked at me across the fire, and I could see her working through something, rearranging something in the way she understood what she was seeing. She was not a person who rearranged slowly. "I said something in the atrium," she said. "You did," I said. "I was wrong," she said, and she said it without performing it, without softening it with qualifications or context. She said it the way you say a true thing. "I know," I said, and I meant it as acceptance, not a point scored. She looked at the fire for another moment. Then she said, "What is the Velkarath doing tonight?" "Resting," I said. "It made 2 committed approach sequences today, and stopped both before completion. That is energetically expensive. It is recalibrating. It will be still tonight, and active again before first light." "Before first light," she repeated. "That is the window," I said, "between 2 and 3 hours before dawn, when the ambient sound is lowest and the light is worst. That is when it will commit fully." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "And we will be ready." "We will be ready," I said. The fire crackled and sent a thin line of smoke up into the dark canopy above us, and the jungle around us was full of sound, the deep, complex, layered sound of a place that was very much alive and very much paying attention. I thought about the Velkarath sitting somewhere in the dark, doing the same thing we were doing, thinking about tomorrow. I felt, without being able to entirely explain it, something that I could only describe as being at home. They came down from orbit 8 hours after we made camp. I heard the ship before the instruments picked it up. Not the sound of the engines. You cannot hear those through an atmosphere of this density at that altitude. The sound I heard was the upper canopy reaction, a ripple of motion and sound in the high branches, the kind that moves outward from a central disturbance. That preceded the scanner alert by approximately 90 seconds. Thren's scanner pinged. He looked at it and then up at the sky. Second ship, he said. Different transponder signature. Not our extraction. Saraveth looked at me. I was already watching the clearing to the south, where the trees had a gap large enough for a descent. The ship was significantly larger than our transport, syndicate military grade. From the hull profile, with reinforced landing struts and multiple external equipment mounting points, it came down with the efficient precision of a crew that had done this many times and was not thinking about it anymore. The hatch opened and 6 people stepped out. I knew what I was looking at before any of them spoke. The way they moved was the first indicator. Each of them was calibrated in a specific way that you only develop after years of fieldwork in extremely dangerous environments. It is not a performance. It is what your body becomes when it has spent enough time in situations where small errors have large consequences, deliberate, economical, always aware of multiple directions without appearing to look at them. Their badges were the final confirmation. Deep blue-black with a 5-point star, a shape so rare on Vailthar Station that most people went years without seeing it in person. Apex hunters. All 6 of them. The one in the lead was someone I recognized from the syndicate records. Cassaveth. She held the longest current Apex tenure on record, 42 years at that rank. The Dralkai built tall and broad-shouldered, and Cassaveth had the additional quality of looking like something that time had made more solid, rather than less. She moved through the jungle clearing with an unhurried authority that did not need to announce itself. She saw Saraveth first. They exchanged a formal acknowledgement that had the quality of people who knew each other through reputation and mutual respect. Saraveth introduced Thren and Parvaz. Cassaveth introduced 2 of her team by name. Then Cassaveth looked past the group and found me. I was crouched at the edge of the clearing, examining the overnight soil compression near the camp perimeter, which was showing a pattern I had been thinking about since before dawn. The Velkarath had come closer during the night than I had expected. Not into the fire's margin of influence, but within 20 meters of it. It had circled at that distance for part of the night, testing the perimeter, learning the setup. That was not in the behavioral profile either. The profile did not account for a Velkarath that was adapting to novel threat conditions. Cassaveth walked toward me. Her footsteps were quiet for someone her size, which told me things about how long she had been doing this. She stopped a few meters away and looked at what I was looking at. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The soil compression pattern." "Yes," I said. "It came within 20 meters overnight. The profile suggests it would not approach an active fire source." "It did not cross the fire margin," Cassaveth said. "No," I said, "but it came closer than it should have. It is updating its behavior. It has decided we are not going to flee, and it is trying to understand what we are." I looked up at her. "It is a fast learner." Cassaveth studied the compression pattern for a moment longer. Then she straightened. "Your name is Kale Dren," she said. "Human, Class 1 apprentice." She did not say it the way the customs officer had said it. She said it the way you state coordinates before navigating. That's for the raid. As facts. "Yes," I said. "Saraveth's log has you identifying the correct territorial range from the dossier before landing," she said, redirecting the approach route. "Identifying the attack pattern as non-solitary in mechanism, despite the profile classification. Moving ahead of 2 equipment reads during the first approach sequence." She paused. "And lighting a fire based on botanical ecology survey data from an archive most operational hunters have not accessed." "Yes," I said. Cassaveth was quiet for a moment. Her team had spread out around the perimeter, running their own scans. One of them, a heavy-built individual with apex rank and a long scar across the left side of their jaw, was looking at me from across the clearing, with an expression I could not immediately read. Then Kasavith said, "How long have you been tracking the Velkarath?" "Since we landed," I said. "Approximately 21 hours." She was still for a moment. "Walk me through what you know." I walked her through it, all of it, the territorial range discrepancy, and what it meant for the approach, the attack structure, the withdrawal and reset behavior, the intelligence level I had assessed from the 2 aborted second passes, the overnight learning behavior shown in the soil pattern, the 2 to 3 hour pre-dawn window I had identified as the likely full commitment window, based on when the ambient sound dropped lowest, and when the creature's energy levels would have recovered from the previous day's expenditures. I told her about the 40-second reset window that I had identified from the second approach sequence. When the Velkarath aborted and repositioned, there was a specific interval between the abort decision and the new position being established, during which it was exposed and stationary. 40 seconds, approximately, maybe slightly less. I told her the specific terrain position I believed the creature would commit from in the pre-dawn window, based on 3 days of accumulated behavioral reading. Kasavith listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. The apex hunter with the jaw scar had walked closer during my explanation, and was now standing within earshot, listening. Kasavith said, "The 40-second window. How confident are you?" "Confident enough to commit to it," I said. "Not so confident that I have not prepared for it to be wrong." She nodded once. Then she looked over at her team. Then at Saraveth's team. Then back at me. The scarred apex hunter said, from where he was standing, "I have been hunting Class Omega creatures for 23 years. I have never seen a behavioral read that comprehensive after less than 2 days on the ground." He did not say it admiringly. He said it the way you say something factual about a situation that requires you to update an assumption. Kasavith looked at me and said, "We came for this contract. We have the rank and the equipment for a clean resolution." She paused. "You have the read." I waited. "My team will support yours," she said. "You have the scent of this hunt. We will follow your assessment." There was a specific quality to the silence that followed. Saraveth heard it. Thren heard it. Parvus heard it. 6 of the most experienced hunters in the galaxy, standing in a jungle on a death world, and the senior among them had just said that she would follow the read of the person with the lowest rank badge in the clearing. Kasaveth did not say it as a favor. She said it as a tactical decision, which was the only reason it meant what it meant. "The pre-dawn window," I said. "We need to be in position 2 hours before dawn. I have the terrain layout mapped." "Show me," Kasavith said. I showed her. She listened, asked 3 questions, and suggested a modification to the outer perimeter coverage that was genuinely good, and that I incorporated immediately. She had 42 years of experience, and it showed in the quality of the questions she asked, which were exactly the right questions. We ran through the full plan twice. Kasavith's team asked questions, my team gave answers when they had them, and deferred to me when they did not. The scarred hunter, whose name was Dreth, said very little, but watched everything with the kind of attention that means he was filing it, and would have it ready when he needed it. 2 hours before dawn, we moved into position. I had put us in a wedge arrangement that used the rock formation from our camp as an anchor point on one side, and a dense root cluster as the other. The Velkarath's committed approach, if it came from the position I had assessed, would put it between the 2 anchor points with limited lateral options. The 40-second reset window, if the attack went as the pattern suggested, would come when it passed through the gap between the anchors. Kasavith was on the high point above the rock formation. Her elevation gave her a clean angle on the gap. I had told her the window and the position, and she had told me she understood. We went still. The jungle was very quiet in that pre-dawn hour, quieter than it had been at any point in the previous 2 days. The ambient sound had dropped to almost nothing, which confirmed the timing, and also did something specific to the inside of your chest that is not quite fear, but is adjacent to it, and that I have learned, over many years, to treat as a useful signal rather than an obstacle. We waited. The Velkarath came from exactly where I had said it would come. It came fast, and it came quiet, and it came with full commitment, which is a different quality of motion than the testing passes of the previous day. The full commitment approach has no hesitation built into it. There is no moment of assessment before the final decision. The decision has already been made, and the body is executing it at maximum capacity. It came through the gap between the anchors, and in the moment that it passed through, moving at full speed toward the center of our position, every person in that gap moved exactly as planned. We went to ground and to the sides, in a distributed movement that gave it nothing cohesive to aim at. It passed through without contact, and then it hit the terrain on the other side, which was not the open ground it expected, and it had to adjust. And in the adjustment, the reset began. Cassaveth was ready. The window opened at the 11-second mark from contact, and Cassaveth took the shot at the 14-second mark, clean, precise, from the elevation point above the rock formation, exactly the angle I had mapped. The Velkarath was down by the 30-second mark. The jungle went completely silent for a few seconds. Then, slowly, it began to fill back in with the ambient sound of the surrounding life, animals returning to their normal behavior now that the thing that had made them go quiet was no longer active. Cassaveth came down from the high point and walked to the center of the clearing where the Velkarath had fallen. She stood there for a moment, looking at it. Then she looked at me. 14 seconds into the window, she said. You said 40. I said approximately 40. I said. I allowed for variance. 14 is inside the range. Yes, she said. It is. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, What rank are you filing for, human? I will let the syndicate decide, I said. She almost smiled. They will not have a category for you, she said. I know, I said. Dreth said, from a few meters away. They will have to make one. She found me at the extraction point. The extraction site was a secondary clearing, 2 kilometers from the main camp, marked in our mission packet as the contingency pickup location. It was early morning, the kind of early morning that a jungle has when the sun has been up long enough to start burning the upper canopy dry, but the ground is still cool and damp, and the light comes down in long angles through the gaps in the trees and makes everything look like it is at the edge of a dream. I was sitting on a flat root section near the clearing's edge, checking my equipment for the transit back, when I heard footsteps that were not Threens, and not Parvises, and not any of the 6 apex hunters who were finishing their own clearance procedures on the other side of the clearing. Saraveth sat down beside me without asking whether it was all right to do so, which I understood as a measure of the distance we had covered since Valthar Station's atrium. She did not say anything immediately. She looked at the clearing, at the angled morning light, at the point where the jungle closed off the far edge. I went back to checking my equipment and let the silence have whatever space it needed. After a while, she said, Are all humans like you? It was not the first time I had been asked something like this, in various forms, since Earth joined the Syndicate. It was the version of the question that contained the most honesty. I thought, not are humans dangerous, which was the version people asked when they were afraid. Not, what makes humans special, which was the version people asked when they were performing interest. Just, are they all like you? I thought about it for a real moment. Most humans are not hunters, I said, not in the way I use the word. Most humans are engineers and doctors and teachers and builders and musicians, and 1,000 other things. The person who designed the field burner I use to make coffee is a more important person, in a practical sense, than I am. The researchers who mapped the genome of the species that makes up 60% of Earth's forest canopy have done something that matters more than anything I have ever done in a jungle. I looked at the clearing, but all of us carry the same history, I said. Our planet tried to remove us for 4 million years. Ice, disease, extended dry periods, predators, the things we did to each other. We went through all of it, with bodies that were not designed to be the most dangerous thing in our environment. We are not the fastest animal. We are not the strongest. We do not have natural armor or natural weapons of any serious effectiveness. We won by learning to read everything around us as either a potential resource or a potential threat, and by being willing to be patient and curious about both. I set down the piece of equipment I had been checking. I am not special, I said. I just paid attention to what my planet spent 4 million years teaching. Saraveth was quiet for a while. The morning light shifted as a section of high cloud moved over the sun, and then moved off again. I said something in the atrium, she said. I was wrong. She had said this once before. At the campfire on the second night. She was saying it again. I understood. Not because she needed to say it twice, but because the first time had been made in one context, and this time was being made in a different one. This time, it was not about tactics or field performance. This time it was about the atrium itself. I know, I said, and I meant it the same way I had meant it before, which was, yes, and it is done. She looked at me. I am not accustomed to being wrong, she said. I am even less accustomed to saying so. Most people are not, I said. You said it anyway, twice. That is harder than not being wrong in the first place. She looked at the clearing again. What will you do after the rank review, she said. Take the next contract, I said. Which one? There is a dead world in the Helven Reach, I said. It has been listed inaccessible for 80 years. The syndicate classification is extreme threat, unknown nature. No team that has gone in has come back out. She turned and looked at me directly. And you want to go in? I want to know what is in there, I said. Nobody does. That is the interesting part. She was quiet for a moment. Why? She said, and it was a real question, not a challenge. She was trying to understand something, and she was asking, rather than inferring. Because I am curious, I said. And because the unknown parts of the map are the most interesting parts of the map. And because whatever is in the Helven Reach dead world has been stopping everything we send at it for 80 years, which means it is worth understanding. It could end you, she said. Yes, I said. Most things worth understanding can. She was quiet again. The distant sound of the Apex team's equipment being loaded into their ship carried faintly through the trees. Brethren appeared at the far edge of the extraction clearing and gave me the signal that our transport was 4 minutes out. I started packing the last of my equipment. Saraveth watched me and then said, Cassaveth filed a supplementary report this morning, before her team departed. Her entire team signed it. She paused. She described your behavioral tracking work as a discipline without syndicate classification. I know, I said. She told me she was filing it. 6 Apex signatures on a report about a Class 1 apprentice, Saraveth said. That has not happened before. Apparently not, I said. The review board will be required to respond to it, she said. It triggers a mandatory rank assessment. Yes, I said. What do you expect they will do? She said. I thought about it. I expect they will argue about it for several days, I said. And then they will make a new category. They will have to, because Cassaveth's report will be very specific about why none of the existing categories apply, and Cassaveth does not write imprecise documents. Saraveth almost smiled. It was a genuine one, not the polished social expression she had worn in the atrium. No, she said, she does not. I shouldered my pack. Our transport came in low over the tree line, and the canopy reacted the way it had reacted to the Apex team's ship, that outward ripple of motion and sound. Will you go to the Helven Reach alone? Saraveth said. Probably not, I said. The syndicate will require a team for a dead world contract, and whoever signs on will need to be comfortable with going into a situation where we do not know what we are dealing with. And you are comfortable with that, she said. I have spent most of my life in situations where I did not fully know what I was dealing with, I said. The not knowing is not the dangerous part. The dangerous part is thinking you know when you do not. She stood. The transport was settling into the clearing, and the downdraft from its descent moved through the surrounding trees and brought the smell of hot engine work into the cool morning air. When the syndicate creates the new category, she said, there will be others who file for it. Probably, I said. There are already humans in the guild who do what I do in different forms. Field researchers, ecological surveyors, tracker consultants, people who have been doing variations of this work under whatever category the syndicate could fit them into, because there was not a better one. They will all want to test for the new rank, she said. Yes, I said, and most of them will make it. Not because humans are extraordinary, because we come from a very specific kind of school, and we have been enrolled in it since before we were a species. The transport ramp came down and Thren waved from the top of it. Parvus was already aboard. Saraveth's own extraction transport would arrive in the next 20 minutes. I knew from the mission schedule. I started walking toward the ramp. Then I stopped and looked back. Saraveth was standing at the edge of the extraction clearing in the angled morning light. She looked, for the first time since I had seen her, like someone who was simply standing in a place, not a person performing a position. She looked like someone who had spent 3 days in a difficult jungle and come out of it having understood something she had not understood before. "There is a coffee supply kiosk on Vailthar Station, level 7, I said. "They import beans from 3 different Earth regions. If you are ever back on station, it is worth stopping." She looked at me. "I was unpleasant to you in the atrium," she said. "You were," I said. "The coffee is still good." The look on her face when I turned and walked up the ramp was something I did not try to name. It was complex, and it was genuine, and that was enough. The transport lifted. Through the small port window, I watched the jungle fold back into itself below us, green and dense and very much alive, and I thought about the Velkarath's body in the clearing, and about Kasavith standing over it in the early morning, and about the things she had said. "They will not have a category for you." They did not. Not yet. The rank review document arrived 3 days after we returned to Vailthar Station. It was longer than most syndicate administrative documents, which tend toward concision. The length was explained by the number of annexed reports, Kasaveth's supplementary filing, which was thorough, a separate note from Dreth that was brief but precise, Thren's operational log, which he had filed voluntarily, and which included a level of observational detail about my field performance that I found slightly embarrassing to read, and a historical review compiled by the review board itself that traced every instance in syndicate history when a rank assessment had been required because no existing classification applied to the person being assessed. There were 9 such instances. This was the 10th. The new rank designation was announced the following morning. Pathfinder. No number. No tier position in the existing hierarchy. A single classification for a discipline that the syndicate's formal review document described as comprehensive environmental behavioral reading, multi-domain threat assessment from non-instrumental signal interpretation, and adaptive pattern recognition across non-analogous biological systems. The syndicate document was careful and precise, and used a great deal of formal language to describe, essentially, what my planet had spent 4 million years teaching every creature that managed to survive it. I read the document in my transit room with a cup of coffee, and then put the new badge in my jacket pocket next to the old bronze apprentice disc, which I had kept because it seemed right to keep it. The Pathfinder badge was a different shape from any other syndicate rank. It was not a disc. It was small and flat and angular, like a compass needle without a compass, pointing in no predetermined direction. I thought that was well chosen. The Helvan Reach Dead World contract was still open. I had checked before the rank announcement came through. 62 days since the last team had gone in. No contact. No recovery. The syndicate had moved the contract status from active to suspended pending risk reclassification, which was their way of saying they were not sure what to do with it. Within 2 hours of the Pathfinder designation going live in the syndicate system, 17 humans had queried the rank for eligibility requirements. Kasavith had co-signed the sponsorship forms for all 17 of them before the day was out, which was not required, but which sent a message that I suspected was deliberately sent. I booked the next available transit toward the Helvan Reach. Not to go in yet. Not alone. Not immediately. But to go and see the place, and stand at whatever boundary the syndicate had marked around it, and read it the way you read everything. Carefully. Patiently. With attention given to what the environment itself was saying, rather than what the document said it was saying. That was the starting point. It was always the starting point. 4 million years of schooling, and the lesson that never changed. Pay attention to what the world is actually doing, not what you have decided it should be doing. Stay curious, stay patient, and when the map and the territory disagree, trust the territory. I picked up my pack. It was the same pack I had arrived on Vailthar Station with, a little heavier now with the addition of some local plant samples I had taken on Drathvel for a research collective back on Earth, a copy of the botanical ecology survey I had used for the fire placement, and a new journal that was still mostly empty. The Pathfinder badge sat in my pocket. The transit corridor was loud and full of people and smelled like ozone and metal, and the particular warm note that I always associated with rain on hot stone. I walked through it thinking about the Helvan Reach. Thinking about a dead world that had been silent for 80 years, and whatever was inside it, that had kept it that way. Thinking about what kind of school a planet has to run to produce something that can stop everything the Syndicate sends. I thought about the 4 million years behind me, and whatever was in front of me. We were just getting started.